I'm not even sure how to start this video because there is so much to unpack. So much I want to say, and we're going to deep dive into some lore too. Last night I saw Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and my original idea was to go home and do like a live stream review so I could talk to the community about it, but if I did it live, I know I would forget to talk about several very important things. So this is going to be it. Let me go ahead and start off by saying that this video is going to be spoiler filled. So this video is more for the people that don't care about spoilers, or if you already saw the movie and you just want to get someone else's opinion or some explanation to some things that the movie introduced. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers all around. And also, if you expect a video completely hating on the movie and bashing every aspect about it, you're probably in the wrong place. I'm not going to be doing that. But there is a portion that just openly hates anything Disney touches Star Wars related, regardless of the level of quality before it even comes out. There's also another segment of the population that loves to rant about anything SJW culture related, anti-SJW. I don't care about any of that. I just want to talk about a movie. I just enjoy movies or I don't. Simple as that. And I think with this movie, it's as divisive as The Last Jedi was. From what I gathered just by kind of scrolling through social media, a lot of the people that absolutely hated The Last Jedi like Rise of Skywalker. But then on the other side of things, if you really like The Last Jedi, you probably don't like Rise of Skywalker as much. It's crazy. It's just completely backwards to what happened after The Last Jedi came out. As for me, I have to look at this movie more as a Star Wars fan versus a traditional film critic. Because to me, Star Wars has really surpassed being just a movie a long time ago. Star Wars is an entire multimedia universe, from comics to video games to movies, animated series. Star Wars is quite possibly the fictional universe that I'm most passionate about above all others. I think it's so awesome that as a kid in 1997, I believe it was 97, going to the theaters to watch the special editions of the classic movies in theaters, and I just fell in love with the series from that point forward. And then in my teenage years, the prequels came out, watched those, and now as an adult with a family of his own, I could take my kids to go watch the new trilogy. That's why Star Wars is so special to me. It's just this cross-generational thing that exists. That's so much more than just simply being a movie. And as far as Rise of Skywalker, as a film, it's got plenty of flaws, which I'll get into all that. But as a conclusion to the Star Wars saga and a part of the Star Wars universe, I loved it. And I hated The Last Jedi. I hate The Last Jedi so much. Most of the stuff Last Jedi put out there that I didn't like, this movie just kind of erases and undoes. Let's talk about the overall plot, though. As of The Last Jedi, the First Order has taken over the galaxy, and the Resistance was mostly destroyed. That's still intact, but now the Emperor seems to have returned, and he's threatening the entire galaxy. So Kylo Ren is looking for him to kill him, since he might be a threat to his power, and the Resistance wants him gone too. And he's hiding out on this secret Sith planet with this enormous fleet that he's been building for decades, and the only way to reach him is to find a Sith artifact that shows how to get to the planet. That's the overall premise. I really like the story. Having Palpatine back as the main villain was awesome, and he's just as dastardly as ever. When we see him, he looks like shit. He's missing fingers, he can't move on his own, he's on like this machine that carries him around. It's clear that he's never recovered from his defeat in Return of the Jedi. How he survived being thrown down the Death Star shaft and then the explosion of the Death Star is not explained. The most explanation we get is when he repeats the line from Revenge of the Sith about the dark side powers being considered to be unnatural.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
I thought that was a really cool throwback to the prequels, but knowing Star Wars, they're going to explain that in a comic book, a novel, or something. And that's why it's so hard to judge this movie as just a movie, because parts of the story are going to be left unexplained intentionally to create stories in other forms of media. That's what happens with Star Wars. I have no problem with that, but I can understand why that would be a criticism from a filmmaking point of view. One of the things I hated the most about The Last Jedi is how Snoke was built up to be this huge threat, and then he's struck down like he's nothing. nothing. Now we have an explanation. He was nothing. And the First Order was also nothing. They were both these huge distractions to the galaxy, manipulated by the Emperor the whole time. He used Sith science and cloning technology to create Snoke and build up the First Order, while he was hiding out in the unknown regions for decades, building up his true replacement for the Empire, the Final Order. The First Order and Snoke were just pawns. So a couple things here. Let's get into some lore. These are my favorite parts when I talk about Star Wars. In the original expanded universe, the Emperor also survived, so this is not a new concept. And it's no surprise that Disney has been taking elements of these legend stories and incorporating them into canon, except their own versions, of course. In Dark Empire, when Palpatine died, he jumped into a clone body. So he has this assembly line of bodies, and he jumps into them as he gets killed every time. And he also happened to have a huge fleet of ships to destroy innocent planets called World Devastators. That's pretty much exactly what happens in Rise of Skywalker. It's basically Dark Empire the movie. It's impressive when you see this massive fleet that he's been quietly building up while the rest of the galaxy was at war. Just a huge collection of Star Destroyers. You could barely see the sky. And another thing I love is how Star Wars super weapons keep getting more and more ridiculous. The Death Star could blow up planets with a single laser. You've got Starkiller Base that could blow up multiple planets at once. How do you top that, right? Well, now each Star Destroyer is equipped with a portable planet-destroying laser. It's over the top, and it's kinda awesome, actually. You may ask yourself, how the hell did nobody notice that the Emperor was alive and building this enormous fleet? And this is where you have to know a little bit of the extended lore. He was doing this in the unknown regions of the galaxy. When he was the Emperor, he spent a lot of time studying that area, and he had contingency plans for the remains of the Empire moving there. It's a part of the galaxy that's mostly unexplored because it's so dangerous. A lot of myths come from there, a lot of legends come from there, no one really knows what's out there. It's filled with black holes, solar storms, really weird unexplained space shit, so it was the perfect place to hide, and the Sith had many secrets there. With all this new information, I am now okay with Snoke dying so worthlessly in The Last Jedi. He was simply a tool that Palpatine used to corrupt Ben Solo and cause chaos in the galaxy. Of course that wasn't the idea then, but now you have to take it as a whole trilogy since all 3 parts are out. Now I want to stress that this movie doesn't fix everything Last Jedi did, but it provides explanations to certain aspects that made no sense, like how was Rey so powerful naturally, if her parents were nobodies, and now we have an explanation. Huge spoiler incoming if for some reason you didn't see the beginning of this video. Palpatine had a son at some unexplained point who had a daughter, Rey, and he tried hiding her from the Emperor. Palpatine had his own son and his wife killed, as a Sith would do, and Rey was hidden on Jakku. She is the Emperor's granddaughter. Some people hate that. I think it's a great twist. She's descended from one of the most powerful Force users of all time, so her power level's a bit easier to swallow now. By the way, Legends also played with the idea of Palpatine having a son too. It turned out not to be true in the long run, but the idea of him having children, also nothing new. As Palpatine's granddaughter, Rey's arc in the movie focuses more on her struggling to deal with the truth behind her lineage and her visions of taking the throne of the Sith, and actively fighting against her destiny, and you see her grow even stronger and develop new powers, which I've also heard many complaints about, but again, it makes sense within the lore. You see her use her powers to heal even almost fatal wounds. In Star Wars lore, certain Jedi are born with special abilities that other Jedi aren't born with. For example, Sifo Dyas is mentioned in Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, the one that commissioned the entire clone army seen in the Clone Wars.
Please tell your master, Sifo Dyas, that his order will be met on time.
I'm sorry, Master...
Jedi Master Sifo Dyas is still a leading member of the Jedi Council, is he not?
He had the ability to see the future, and it almost drove him crazy. What the Jedi call foresight. Anakin also had a version of that ability. Ezra from Star Wars Rebels could tame animals and communicate with them like a Jedi Dr. Doolittle almost. Cal Kestis from Jedi Fallen Order had the power to feel the history of objects he touched. So that's why force healing makes sense, and even the Emperor makes a comment in this movie that it's an ability that hasn't been seen in generations, so it's incredibly rare. And Kylo Ren is still in here doing bad things, but still struggling against the pull of the dark side and the light, and of course Palpatine's trying to control him. His arc in the movie was a redemption arc, where he finally breaks free from the dark side, and there was a really cool subtle moment that I enjoyed. He turns back to the light and chucks his lightsaber, and he goes after Palpatine, but near the end when he's trying to find Rey and turn against the Emperor, he's just running around with a blaster, and it reminded me so much of Han Solo. So it was a really cool touch having visually resembled his father. Another thing I enjoyed about this movie, there were several power-ups to say the least. Sure, you can poke some holes in the logic, but I'm a huge fan of The Force Unleashed, which was filled with exaggerated Force abilities, and we see that here on full display. You see Rey pulling down a transport ship with the Force, while Kylo Ren is on the other side trying to pull it down too. And Palpatine at one point regains his full strength and unleashes Force lightning, which we've seen him do before, but they went all out this time. He just shoots electricity in the sky, and it's this giant column of lightning, and all these ships are getting electrocuted all over the sky. It is absurd. At the end of the day, the best thing about Rise of Skywalker to me was that it felt like Star Wars again. I hate going back to The Last Jedi so much, but you really have to. In that movie, all these characters were split up, doing their own thing. It didn't really feel like there was any interconnectedness between them in that movie. And in this movie, it's the total opposite. Rey, Poe, Finn, Chewie, they all go together to look for the Sith artifact. So they get into all these shenanigans, and C-3PO is also there doing his C-3PO-ness, constantly being worried, characters telling him to shut up. It's Star Wars. And also Finn. Let's talk about Finn. This movie firmly establishes what fans have been thinking all along. Finn is absolutely Force sensitive. If they kept making more movies, he would probably be trained as a Jedi. He meets other kids that were First Order troopers that left the First Order behind just like he did, and they explain it as them just feeling something, almost like a spark within them. And this goes back to one of the few things I did like about The Last Jedi, when Luke teaches Rey the lesson that the Force doesn't belong to anybody. It's not for the Jedi to have ownership over, or for the Sith to twist for their own ends. The Force belongs to everybody. Like the classic movies have always been stressing if you pay attention. The Force surrounds us, it binds us all, not just the Jedi or the Sith. And that's a huge mistake that the Jedi made that essentially led to their downfall. They became so dogmatic in their views of the Force that they looked down upon any other group that used the Force in any different way. Jedi Fallen Order also touches on that aspect of the Jedi, by the way. It has to do with you researching an alien culture that was Force sensitive, but the Jedi were discouraged from researching them. So it was really cool seeing these non-Jedi characters like Finn becoming aware of the Force. And this goes back to a larger aspect of the new trilogy. The title Force Awakens didn't apply to just Rey. It was awakening within people as a whole across the galaxy. Could that be what restoring balance to the Force meant? I still stand by the fact that not everybody can be a Jedi, and some people are more sensitive to the Force than others. But the main point of all this is that the Force doesn't belong to one specific group. Let's talk about Anakin. One criticism I do have is that in a way, this movie does kind of cheapen Anakin's role as the chosen one to bring balance. But I've thought about this over and over, and I love that it's so open to interpretation. So let me explain how I see it personally. And I do want to hear from you guys in the comments below about what balancing the Force ultimately means to you and how Anakin played into the prophecy of the chosen one. Going back to the prequels, Yoda and Mace Windu make it clear that the prophecy of the chosen one could have been misread. The prophecy of the chosen one never made it clear on exactly what it meant to bring balance.
With all due respect, Master, is he not the chosen one? Is he not to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force?
So the prophecy says.
A prophecy that misread could have been.
Anakin was supposed to be the chosen one to restore the balance. The Jedi saw that as kill all the bad guys. But what happened? Anakin brought the destruction of the Jedi, then in the long run, he helped destroy the Empire. That was Anakin fulfilling his role. There was no longer one side taking ownership of the Force as theirs, good or bad. That's balance. Anakin's role as the chosen one was fulfilled. It sounds awful, but the Jedi were purged, the Empire crumbled, and the power of the Sith plummeted. Near the end of the movie, Rey hears the voices of all the previous Jedi speaking to her, which, by the way, you hear Mace Windu, Qui-Gon Jinn, Ahsoka Tano, Kanan Jarrus from Star Wars Rebels. Everyone put their voice in here. But the most important part of that scene is that you actually hear Anakin Skywalker's voice talking to Rey, saying, "Bring balance as I did," which confirms that he fulfilled his role already. He brought balance. And now that Palpatine was back, causing so much chaos and destruction, the dark side of the Force was rising again, throwing everything out of balance, and the light needed to rise up to meet it so they can cancel each other out. Balance. I know that was a lot to take in, but in my mind, it all works so beautifully now, while still keeping Anakin as an important part of the story. He still played the part he was meant to play, just not as the Jedi thought he would. But the overall theme is what was really well done. Originally, you had a Palpatine twisting the Skywalker bloodline to destroy the Jedi. Now that's flipped, and a Palpatine was corrupted by the Jedi, Luke, to destroy the Sith. This is the very definition of a space opera. This is Star Wars. Now some classic characters. Leia and Luke are back as expected. Luke is a Force ghost, and I loved him in this. Even though it was just a brief moment, you could see the glimmer in his eye when he got to throw some shade at The Last Jedi. That scene when Rey hands him the lightsaber and he just chucks it. Horrible, horrible, horrible scene. What a slap in the face to the ending of The Force Awakens. I hated it, but in this movie, Rey's frustrated, she throws it into a fire, and suddenly Luke appears, boom, grabs the lightsaber, and he makes a point that a Jedi's weapon should be treated with more respect. I actually laughed out loud at that scene because it was so obvious they put that in there to throw a jab at The Last Jedi. And once again, Disney borrowed from the expanded universe and revealed that Leia was trained by Luke as a full-blown Jedi. She had a lightsaber and everything, and we could see them training and looking all CG young after Return of the Jedi. That was cool, and it explains her Superman flight in The Last Jedi. Still looked ridiculous, but it makes a little more sense now. Lando's back in the movie, and he's just Old Man Lando. It's a pleasure to see him back on screen. And one cameo I didn't expect in a blink and you'll miss it moment. Seriously, if you look down to grab some popcorn, put it in your mouth, you'll miss it. Wedge Antilles, one of the best X-Wing pilots in Star Wars lore. He was flying around there too. I wish he got a little more screen time. It was just a real quick cameo, but he was there. So I love this movie. Perfect, right? No, there's still a lot of things they could have done a little bit better. So here's some criticisms I did have about the movie. The ending sequence, the overall ending was done very, it was very messy. And I had mixed feelings on how it all closed out. In the end, it looks like Rey died fighting, like she sacrificed herself and that was it. And then Ben Solo's redeemed and he pops up and he's holding her. So I thought that was fine. I think they should have left it at that. And he carries on the Skywalker bloodline. But instead, he uses the Force to transfer his life essence into her. So she pops up back to life, and then he dies. It was all just really weird. It's like, well, she's dead, he's alive, now he's dead, now she's alive. Very convoluted. And before he died, they shared this romantic kiss out of nowhere. It was very awkward. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I've never really gotten a big romantic feel between the two, especially since Finn is so clearly into Rey, and she clearly cares about Finn a lot. I thought it would have made more sense having Finn and Rey together. But all of a sudden, her and Ben Solo shares a kiss. I sat there just thinking, why? It felt really unnecessary and just written into the script last minute. I don't know why that was there. Even having Ben Solo die after he was redeemed, I had mixed feelings on. But at the same time, it does make sense that he died. At this point in the trilogy, he had done so many horrible things, including killing his own father. I think the only true way for him to redeem himself was to sacrifice himself, to do the heroic self-sacrifice. I think it could have been written a little better how he did it, but he did. And think about this too. This is another point I thought of after watching this movie. Kylo Ren's main goal was to become Darth Vader. That's all he wanted. In a way, he did. Darth Vader returned to the light, sacrificed himself to save someone. Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, redeemed himself, became Ben Solo again, sacrificed himself to save someone. In a way, he became Vader, through and through. And I think that was the idea when they wrote this scene, but I don't think it was executed very well. And in the ending of the movie, Rey goes back to the Skywalker ranch and she buries Luke's lightsaber in the sand. That was a really cool, touching scene. But then they do something a little weird. Oh, and by the way, she does create a lightsaber of her own, they reveal in this scene, and it's orange. I thought that was awesome because we've never seen an orange one in the movies. We've seen them in the video games, comic books, and whatnot, but never in the movie. Someone stops and asks her name, and she's like, Rey Skywalker. So she takes the Skywalker name and adopts herself into it. I kind of hate that. I kind of love it at the same time. Let me explain. I kind of hate it because she's not a Skywalker at all. She's a Palpatine, and her overall arc in the movie was accepting who she was and not being ashamed of it. Just accepting who she was and then becoming her own person. So I think that kind of cheapens her story and kind of goes backwards on where she was going. Is getting rid of her real last name and changing it to Skywalker, is that really her accepting who she is? I don't really think so. At the same time, why I like it, because in a way, the Skywalker legacy will continue. But more importantly, I thought it was the best middle finger she could have given the Emperor. I mean, his own granddaughter defeated him, then drops his last name and takes the name of his greatest enemy. Kind of poetic if you look at it that way. So, yeah, kind of hate it, kind of like it. Another criticism I have, this movie focuses heavily on undoing The Last Jedi. It really does. Which, I like that. I did not like The Last Jedi, but there is a negative effect of doing this. Now we have this weird movie in the middle of this new trilogy that doesn't matter anymore. Seriously, when you go back and watch The Last Jedi, a lot of the plot points they start, now you'll be like, none of this matters. Now we have this weird filler middle story where some stuff happens. So that's the downside of doing that, and it really makes me wish that J.J. Abrams had just directed the middle movie too. So we could have had a trilogy that flows well. Now I feel like we have The Force Awakens, this thing in the middle, and then a conclusion that kind of hops over the middle. It's all very messy now. And another thing too, the pacing of the movie was very off. It was just a constant repetition of things happening. Every 2 seconds, Kylo Ren would pop up. So they would all go somewhere, Kylo Ren pops up, they fight, then run away, and then Kylo Ren pops up again later. It all just keeps repeating until the end of the movie. I kind of feel like they were just trying to fill parts of the movie with action sequences in order to get the story from point A to point B, and they didn't really know what else to do. So the pacing was very off. And I really don't like this idea of Jedi using these really cool Force powers and then just dying. The same thing they did to Luke that I didn't like in The Last Jedi, they did the same thing to Leia in this movie. I thought killing her off in this movie was kind of unnecessary. I didn't really see the need for that. But the way it's done, she reaches out with the Force to communicate with Kylo Ren, to bring him back to the light side, and she overexerted herself and died. I mean, these are the children of Anakin Skywalker. I know they're a little older now, but what is it with using these Force powers and then overexerting yourself and just collapsing and dying? I don't understand that. They should have left that with The Last Jedi and not repeated it, but yes, they do repeat that in this movie. I think that about wraps up my thoughts on Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. I'm sure I forgot something, and I'm going to remember it after I post this video. It's a very flawed movie. It raises some questions that still need to be answered, but as a Star Wars movie, it does a great job closing out this new trilogy with a satisfying conclusion that does respect the lore that came before it. It's filled with nostalgia, which to me is a good thing. If The Last Jedi left a sour taste in your mouth, I think you should give this one a chance, because The Last Jedi left a sour taste in my mouth, and I feel complete opposite about this movie. What did you guys think of the movie? What are some of your criticisms? What are some of the things you liked? I'll talk more with you guys in the comments. I'll catch you later. Since you made it to the end of this video, I assume you enjoyed it, so why don't you go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any new content. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, links in the description below, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can join my Patreon or become a channel member. This is Fabian, I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.